Hey everybody, before we get started, just to remind you this episode is brought to you by our patrons like Aka Comics, Anastasia G, Qua, Jeremy Vasquez, Kylie Denton, Nestor Flores, Ro Grubbin, Shawnee P, Soda Sono 424, and Video Gamer 75. And if you like what we do want to see more consider some Patreon. You get access to those early on for goodies every helps us out. Thank you for your support, everybody. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll a 5-star. And if that intro bit between the Patreon bit was super silent, that's because that clip was too long. That was Moscow by Genghis Khan. Infamous meme song. And hopefully the clip isn't too long and it gets to stay in. Anyway, hi, it's Wanted. In case you couldn't tell from the special intro music and the title of the video and the thing on your screen right now, this is Wanted for Anastasia, who is also basically she's the titular character of Lostbelt 1, Anastasia. So, yeah, that's why we're doing it, to celebrate that whole thing, and her banner appearance, as a permanent caster. Now, obviously, Wanted has kind of gone back and forth on who gets what slots when and stuff, but we're returning to form a little bit. We're doing a permanent but new 5-star. We're going to talk about no returnings, no 4-stars. Not limited, but still. You're going to have to wait a little bit for that. Wait like a week. But yeah, we're here. And hopefully you're not going crazy in quarantine town. So, if this is your first time watching an FGO Wanted, basically what we do here is we break down the video into roughly 4-ish parts. We're going to talk about the character's real-life history. We're going to talk about their fate lore with a capital L. We're going to talk about their mechanics, because that drives a lot of people's choices with units. And we're going to talk about their rarity. Not their star rarity, even though I used to joke that didn't matter, but now it technically does because I've done some 4-star wanteds. But anyway, we're going to talk about how frequently their rate ups are, which obviously is a big deal that matters. As we have discussed before, both on Wanted and on our flagship show, Let's Talk FGO, the chances of getting spooked by a permanent SSR whenever are pretty low. It does happen, and obviously, your anecdotes will be like, oh, it happens to me all the time. Statistically speaking, it's not very common, right? So, if you really want a servant, you want to try and make sure to roll up on rate ups, but I know how it is, trust me. I've gotten the spooks and the weirdos too. But yeah, so, Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova. Blah. I accidentally almost added an extra syllable in there. Technically, Grand Justice Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova. Youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, last sovereign of Imperial Russia. Let's just dive into that real-life history segment, because there's not too much else in the intro to go through. This character actually is a real person with real history, so they get a full-blown intro slide and stuff. Honestly, you have probably heard of Anastasia for a couple of different reasons. Rough outline, she's one of the later-born characters in Fate to appear. Date of birth, June 18th, 1901. Date of death in 1918. So, not the most recent. I don't know, you're going to ask, who's the most recent then? They're not in this video, so it doesn't matter, and I don't got to look that up. But there's a lot of mystique around her, which is kind of going to be interesting when we talk, especially when we talk about later stuff. So, as a youth, she was the youngest daughter of 4. They were quite close. They sometimes styled themselves as Atma, which was their first initial of all of their names, which actually does matter. That's what her Bonsi E is. So that's where that comes from. But we're pretty close to it. Now, obviously, there's some question about health issues. Based on DNA testing, it would seem that the daughters were possibly carriers of hemophilia, but were not actually hemophiliacs like their younger brother. And all in all, generally, were thought to be, intelligent children. Despite being Grand Duchess or Grand Princess, they were apparently raised under pretty strict conditions, sleeping on hard cots, taking cold baths, doing needlework in their rooms and stuff, so not necessarily super fancy pants royalty like some other characters we know. However, and this will become relevant with some of her skill setups and descriptions, Anastasia was said to be quite the little prankster, getting up to a lot of different mischief, being a little shifty, including, hiding rocks and snowballs and, scratching other kids during playtime. Fun little things like that. By the way, also, there's an important linguistic note. This confuses some people. In Russian, the traditional way to abbreviate Anastasia is not Anna, and we should avoid that, one, because of Medusa Lancer being known as Anna already in the setting, so that can be confusing, but also that's just not how you do it. The better abbreviation would be Nastia, or possibly just Stacy if you want to be real Americanized about it. All of the Imperial women were pretty nice friends with Rasputin. There's a lot of rumor and shenanigans about it, but by all current reports, it was pretty innocent. Apparently, children just like the guy. Weird. During the First World War, she was too young to be a nurse like some of her older sisters, but did play games with soldiers to kind of, when touring barracks and military hospitals, to kind of, work out, some morale, helping people recover. And sadly, she, along with the rest of the Imperial family, was killed by the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution in 1918. But that wasn't the end of the story, because, as you may know, from the whole, thing, especially the movie, which is being used as a joke slide reference right now, it was a very persistent rumor and a very long-standing urban legend, basically, that Anastasia had survived as the youngest. She had escaped or been rescued because the graves were not located for a long time, not until after the wall fell. So there was a lot of persistent urban legend about her surviving, and there were several imposters, including Anna Anderson. There were, several people claiming to be the Grand Duchess, who were not. We have unfortunately found all the bodies. The mystery is ruined. But it was a pretty common theme for a while, with some storytelling, some notes, rumors, etc., that survived, and all very, very interesting kind of urban legend stuff you've probably heard of. So that kind of has certainly made her probably the most memorable of the Imperial princesses who died, was just the whole rumors surrounding her death and whatnot, or lack thereof. Fun stuff. Also, another, interesting note, if you're wondering, she is so recent, and we'll talk a little bit about that in lore, which we're about to transition to, but if you're wondering, is she really, fit to go on the Throne of Heroes? Well, apart from all the urban legend stuff, I should point out that her name was taken from a saint, Saint Anastasia, and, in 2000, she and the rest of her family were actually, canonized, as saints by the Russian Orthodox Church. So, yeah, there's a certain amount of stickiness and remembrance to this character. I'm using character not in a literal term, by the way. So, in Fate, okay, before we go anywhere with lore, there's an important distinction that needs to be made. So, the summonable Anastasia is, quote-unquote, proper human history, proper human order Anastasia. There's still some weird stuff in there that we'll talk about in a split second. But, as a summonable character, she is technically her own instance, because that's how servants work, which is separate from the enemy Anastasia, who appears in the Lostbelt chapter and is a servant of one of the cryptors. I'm not looking at his name right now. I can't trust myself to pronounce it. Who have their own arc and thing going on, and they are not necessarily the same person. They don't have the same memories and whatever. And so, Anastasia, as she appears as a playable character, and as she appears in some later events, she has a cameo in Summer 3, I believe, talking about how fucking hot it is, and will show up again in Christmas this year, I believe. So, that's the summoned Anastasia, not the quote-unquote enemy Anastasia. Kind of think of it as how certain characters we meet in certain contexts are not themselves, and thus act completely differently. So, if you've summoned Anastasia and are using her as a unit, she is technically a different instance and thus has different personality and different markers than the one we meet in story. Similar to how Camelot Tristan is basically literally a different person. So, otherwise, so it's, kind of a big deal in FGO story. This is also, she's original to FGO. But in the Fate setting, there's a couple of different things from history. I don't think we've really done any big remarkings on what's up with Rasputin Man, and we'll get into that later. But Fate supposes that the Tsarist Russians, the imperial family, were mages of some variety. Just as part of, I guess, being a really old noble family with stuff. So, they weren't really powerful by the modern period, but they had some knowledge and awareness of magecraft, which is part of why Anastasia is a caster. And under their service, they had this weird elemental spirit, aka a fairy by Nas's definition, V, who I should also probably talk about a little bit. But it's a horror novella by a Russian writer, Nikolai Gogol. It's pretty short, but basically it involves a mysterious monster with super large eyelids. It's claimed kind of back and forth that V really is kind of an elemental, a fairy, right? The Gnome King that Gogol claimed, but also there's a lot of research that he just made it up. So there's the classic fate interplay of, well, is V really real or really not? I don't know, but the plot device is that as she died, Anastasia was able to contract with the powerful entity V, which is the source of her noble phantasm and some of her abilities. It did not help her, but that kind of cemented her as a person with supernatural powers, which can appear as a servant. So, interestingly enough, Anastasia as a unit is kind of a blend of Anastasia Nikolaevna, the Romanov princess, and also the literary figure V. But he only really shows up in maybe some of her animations and her noble phantasm stuff, so not super detailed. Just that's where that came from. It's read a summary sometime. It's real spookum. So that's basically it. Obviously, no major spoilers about the outline, but she is a kind of a big deal character in Lostbelt, the ones. So you're going to see a lot of her there, presumably, and she does appear in a couple of other stories later, and is permanent. So obviously, from this point on, she can spook you. Heck, you could even start playing the game before you can even access Lostbelt 1 and get her normally, which is a little weird, but again, that's kind of the thing they're going for, that the summonable one is not necessarily the story one. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump off into mechanics. Alrighty, mechanisms, the mechanicos. So, first of all, here's the thing I didn't realize, but I probably should have because I've done several of these videos. Casters have a lot of similar stat lines. So Anastasia's attack is the same as Tamamo and Merlin, which unfortunately puts her pretty low for an offensive type, but she's got a couple of tricks to get around that. And her max HP is the same as Da Vinci, Waver, but also Merlin and Tamamo. It's weird how that works out. So there's a big block of them, which does mean that it's fairly high. That whole block of HP kids is only beat out by Caster of Nightless City, who has very, very low attack, but ridiculously chunky HP, and Skahak Skadi, who, as you might expect from favoritism and blatant attempts to steal your wallet, has better HP and also better attack. She's just better, I guess, kids. Don't worry, I'm going to exploit this for a video that's going to get 2,000 to 3,000 views. Anyway, it's pretty typical. And do you remember casters have a base damage multiplier of 0.9, so they technically are doing 90% damage at all times, which is a little sad that her attack is so low. But like I said, there's a couple of things to get around that. Pretty standard star absorption for the class. NP charge is 0.5 with, that's a little low for 3 hits arts cards maybe, but she does have 3 of them, a typical caster deck. So you'll be getting a lot of charge out of them, especially because she has territory creation. EX will spoil it. Otherwise, pretty standard stuff. I said it's already as a caster deck, got decent hit counts on the Buster and Quick cards, so while Star Generation isn't really her thing or caster's thing, if you do end up using Quick or Buster cards, you may actually see a little bit of Star action there. And 5 hit extra, so Art Brave Chains are going to generate you a lot of NP. Speaking of which, her Noble Phantasm, pretty straightforward, only 4 hits, but deals strong damage to all enemies. It's Art's AoE, so even more NP shenanigans. It applies Skill Seal to all enemies for 1 turn, and it decreases their defense for 3 turns, which is based on overcharge. So 3 turns of 20% down normally, scaling up to as much as 40%, which would be pretty gnarly if you can get that overcharge. So I know the community's kind of conflicted about Skill Seal at times, and you can see why. For it really, really depends on what enemies you're facing, I should say. Because sometimes if an enemy does a skill instead of attacking you, that's better. They basically wasted a turn. On the other hand, think of it this way. if a Spriggan does double critical up and then crits you, that's probably a lot more painful than if it had just attacked you 3 times and not crit, without those bonuses. So it really depends on the enemies you're going to have to weigh it. Now, the thing I do want to, it's important, especially because it's very relevant right now on the tail end of Saber Wars. Anastasia is a caster. That means you'll probably be using her to beat up assassins a lot. Hey, you know what assassins love? Evades. Now, obviously, she has another skill that will get around this, and we'll talk about that in a second when we talk about her active skills. But she is an AoE, so presumably she's not your primary damage dealer, especially with that attack stat. So the ability to lock down waves of enemies or to clear adds and lock down a boss for a turn so they don't start spamming evades and NP charges and other dumb bullshit, invincibles, whatever, that can be very handy. Okay? So it really is situational, I think, but with the kind of enemies you're facing, and they're going to have a preference for stuff like evade, you're probably going to enjoy that skill seal some of the time. You want to be careful about applying it, but it can really help you out. Otherwise, it's a very straightforward, hey, guess what? She's an arts AoE, which means she's intended to spam that NP, probably, especially with that deck and the setups. So that defense down really hurts. That really is part of amplifying her kit. Let's talk about those active skills. So, first off, Covenant Mystic Eyes. Minimum cooldown is 5 turns, starts at 7. It's self and 1 enemy. Gives you 1 turn of Pierce Invul, 1 turn of Arts Effectiveness, 30 to 50%, so a blue mana burst, very effective. And it also decreases one enemy's debuff resist for 1 turn from 50 to 100%, which means that unless they've got an immunity or some really, really high debuff resist bonuses, you're probably going to make your stuff like that defense down and that skill seal and other stuff stick pretty hard. Now, if you're wondering to yourself, gee, this sounds a lot like Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. Fun lore fact. Actually, based on her materials, that is true. The Clairvoyant Mystic Eyes, or Mystic Eyes of Clairvoyance is probably how they'll be localized, are an ability native to V, but they are also said to be descended from the Celtic god Balor, who could kill you with just a look. They seem to perceive more conceptual weaknesses in things, especially inanimate objects, than necessarily the Death Perception lines, which can be used on inanimate objects, but also are mostly for things that are quote-unquote alive. But yeah, it has a similar effect. It gives your Pierce Invul for 1 turn, which is great if your enemies are being sassy. Gives you a big increase to arts damage, which is what she needs with an attack like that. And then that debuff resist is going to stick. So she can punch pretty hard. Second up, Freezing Charisma, a common Charisma variant trick. This has the usual 10 to 20% attack up for 3 turns. Again, helps her, but also helps your team, because again, she's probably not your primary damage dealer. Also reduces the enemy's attack by the same amount, basically, for 3 turns. So, hey, guess what? She kind of fits in a stall team. Lowering enemies' defense and upping your attack means you're doing, like the equivalent of having like 40% attack up if you can spam her NP or soften them up for allies. And the attack down will mean that people are damaging you much slower, especially for Anastasia on her own. She doesn't have any other really defensive abilities, but she's got a pretty chunky HP, so that can really help just reducing raw damage. Final ability, Shivzik. I'm not going to try real hard. I'm sorry. The Slavic sounds are difficult for me. This means imp in Russian, pretty sure, which is one of her childhood nicknames. Hey, remember that prank thing I talked about? It came back. So this one has a longer cooldown, minimum 7 turns, but it increases your NP gauge from 30 to 50%. That's right. She has the fabled 50% battery. And also has a low chance to stun an enemy for 1 turn. It's only 40 to 60, but it is still a stun opportunity, especially combined with her big debuff resist drop, though you may not be comboing those because that's also her NP steroid. But if you do happen to do them, it can apply. So it's one of those things where you're like, I don't want to count on the stun, I'm really using this for the NP battery, but maybe I'll stun the enemy and soften them up, kind of keep that stall circulation going. The real big winner here is, like I said, the battery. We can go ahead and talk about CE selection. I know we haven't done passives, but we'll come back to that. That means that at her max skill level for her battery, she is compatible with, all the classics. The Golden Sumo, the Halloween Princess. What's the arts one specifically called? Is that Dive into Blue? It's just Dive to Blue. That's the one where you get 50% NP charge if you've got it MLB, and it gives you 10% NP strength and 10% arts. Stuff along those lines. So, that all those 50% battery shenanigans are right there. That's pretty handy. And even if you don't level that skill at all, her base level is still 30%, which means you can use her with K-scopes and other things, which is really useful. And depending on what you're doing, because obviously mostly AoEs are for farming, you may actually be, hitting up some of those loops to actually have the other stuff matter. Like, you may actually fire it off, wipe out a wave, and if you have a long fight at the back end, you might actually get her to fire off a second shot. Or you can just use her to eat a wave whenever you feel like it. She has 2 damage steroids and a battery. It's pretty brutal. Other than that, like I said, just as always with a character who can go up to 50% battery, you're going to want to consider the starting 50% NPs. If you're in a little bit of a longer haul, I would probably recommend, just in general, Arts Effectiveness, NP Effectiveness. Pretty typical for stalls. Her passive skills, we mentioned it earlier, she has Territory Creation EX, so those arts cards slap even harder. They will do more damage and they will generate more NP than you'd expect from her raw numbers. And so her second passive may confuse you with just that icon. That is Contract with the Fairies. It is basically a combo of magic resistance and item creation. So her base debuff success rate is improved by 10%. That's pretty good. And also her debuff resistance increased by 10, which is very handy for attackers. You really don't want to have somebody slap you with a debuff while you're trying to do damage. Overall, what is Anastasia's role? She's an AoE sweeper. Offensive casters are a little hard to come by. Obviously, I don't need this niche personally because I have a Da Vinci, and guess what? Their stats are oddly similar, as are some of their capabilities. The thing to think about with Anastasia is that as an arts-type build, she is probably, we should say, quite stall-friendly. She has a stun, she has a def down, she has an attack down. Da Vinci, for instance, as another AoE arts attacker in caster, doesn't really mesh with that as well. She has Pioneer of the Stars, obviously, so she can do the same 50% battery shenanigans. But she has, stuff like Golden Rule Body, which is good for long plays, like a stall team setups. And she does have a Guts and a defense increase, but it's not really a hard defense. And the thing about her Inherent Wisdom is that you're probably using it to hope that 85% chance that her NP damage up procs. Whereas with Anastasia, her big damage steroids are guaranteed. She will proc that 30 to 50% arts up and will proc that 10 to 20% attack up on her charisma. Honestly, they probably go well in a pair, along with any other major AoE casters you have. If you need damage dealers and you don't have a good single target, just, hey, if you do enough AoEs, that's like a single target. Funny how that works. So keep that in mind. There will be some other, limited AoE attack arts that you can try and work with. Who else does she flow with? Well, technically she's got some support potential, because she has a charisma, and she can decrease enemies' defense and debuff resist, which means that she's basically playing into helping your allies out. She pairs pretty good with a single target offensive caster. Probably better with Sheba, because Sheba is also slightly more arts focused and has some support kit in there. But you can use an Ilya or a Sanzo if you want. And characters who support her, they use, Tamamo. Tamamo is great for this, honestly. With the heal to restore her already large HP, the building more NP charge, reducing skill cooldowns even further, which is great because most of her skill cooldowns are already pretty slim. And just generally adding to the team stall effect, healing, NP gain, better arts, eventually better NP damage. Waver's also a good one. Guess what? If you don't want to get anything, you don't want to use her battery or her battery's not set up, you can use Waver to go that 50% battery all the way, and damage plus, damage cut, that kind of stuff just work out well. She won't really capitalize on Waver's crit buff, though, so keep that in mind. Criticals are not something... Like, if you find out a way to generate enough stars that Anastasia's critting, that's cool. Arts crits are great. She's not built for that. She is built mostly to fire her NP and have it actually do quite a bit of AoE damage, and then either have another character punch the single boss who's left or whatever, or have her keep whittling, which, considering the nature of her Noble Phantasm being V-themed, is pretty on point. So let's talk about Rarity. Now, obviously, she is permanent, but, like we said in the start, spooks and other stuff can be kind of sketchy. So, She will have a raid up, obviously, for the Anastasia release campaign. Duh. It's got her face on it. She will have a specific raid up in the Valentine's events because she's a female SSR, so she will have her own day for that. She will have a raid up for the 4th anniversary, because I think that's when they start introducing Lostbelt themed banners. And there will be an interlude campaign in the future, which will include an interlude for her, which I believe is just quartz. But it will go ahead and work that out. So, not super common in the raid ups. By the way, actually, interesting note is that she's a bonus servant in a couple of places too. For Holy Samba Night, which she appears in, but not necessarily, raid ups. And in Saber Wars 2, interestingly enough. Though I do not believe she is in any of those. Yeah, the summon campaign's real simple in that one. But yeah, so that's basically Anastasia. As a permanent AoE offensive caster, if you aren't lucky enough to have one of the limited ones, you may find her useful. You might actually like her character design, I don't know. And she does do some of her own things, which are kind of interesting. She's a fairly decent team player with her skill set up and a lot of her activity being AoE, whole team gets attack up, whole enemies get defense or attack down, that kind of stuff. All in all, solid caster, as evidenced by the fact that she hasn't had any upgrades. It doesn't really need any, I don't think. Like, everything seems fairly well balanced. Obviously her stun chance is low, and that does mean that because it's a stun and a battery, the time lag is a little big, but still, it's decent, it's a 50% battery. There's something to be said for some simple kits sometimes, Sometimes you just want to hit stuff. So that about wraps this video up. Thank you so much for tuning in to Wanted. Stay tuned for future episodes. And if you're interested in any 4 and 3 stars that are on that banner, be sure to check out our regular show, Let's Take FGO, where we do the segment. It's called So You Didn't Get That 5-star, in case you didn't get that 5-star. And be sure to check out our Lostbelt 1 pregame if you're interested in how tough to beat the story's going to be. All right. So, I'll see you in the next Wanted. Spoilers, it's going to be Ivan. Smiles. But I'll see you there. Hopefully I see you there. Please. Who am I kidding? But if you like this video, be sure to give it a like. If you have any comments, leave them in the comment section down below. You can also hit up our Discord. That link is in the description on our channel page as always. And if you're new here and haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to get always the latest Wanted videos. Yes, the series is going to continue. You can also check out our podcast, Let's Talk FGO, every week. I mentioned a couple of key episodes you may want to look forward to. And other stuff. And if you aren't already doing it, even if you're already subscribed, make sure to hit that bell for notifications so you can always know when we post the latest video, when we stream, anything like that.